The rain hammered against the windshield as Sarah Mitchell drove through the winding mountain roads of Colorado. She had been driving for nearly 6 hours straight, pushing through fatigue to reach her destination. The headlights of her small sedan cut through the darkness, illuminating the wet asphalt that stretched endlessly ahead. She was returning from a business conference in Denver, eager to get home to her quiet apartment in the small town of Pine Ridge. Sarah worked as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm. At 28, she lived a relatively simple life, preferring the peace of mountain living over the chaos of city streets. She had moved to Colorado 3 years ago, seeking solace after a difficult period in her life. The mountains had become her sanctuary, a place where she could heal and rebuild herself away from painful memories. As she navigated another sharp curve, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down for just a moment, reading a message from her friend asking about her arrival time. In that split second of distraction, everything changed. A deer bounded into the road, frozen in her headlights. Sarah jerked the wheel hard to the left, but it was too late. The car skidded on the wet pavement, spinning out of control before slamming into a large pine tree on the side of the road. The impact was devastating. The front of her car crumpled like paper, and Sarah's world went black as her head struck the steering wheel despite her seatbelt. When consciousness slowly returned, Sarah found herself trapped in the twisted metal of her car. Pain radiated through her entire body, but her left leg felt wrong, terribly wrong. She could taste blood in her mouth, and her vision was blurry. With trembling fingers, she managed to reach her phone, which had fallen to the floor. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? Came the voice through the speaker. I've been in an accident, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm trapped in my car on Mountain View Road, about 10 miles outside Pine Ridge. Please, I need help. Stay on the line, ma'am. We're dispatching emergency services to your location. Can you tell me about your injuries? Sarah tried to assess her condition. My leg is hurt badly. I think it might be broken. I'm bleeding, and I can't get out of the car. The door won't open. Help is on the way. Try to stay calm, and don't move too much. 20 minutes later, Sarah heard the distant sound of sirens growing louder. Relief washed over her as she saw the flashing lights through her cracked windshield. The Pine Ridge Volunteer Fire Department arrived first, followed by an ambulance. The paramedics worked quickly to extract her from the wreckage, carefully placing her on a stretcher. What's your name, sweetheart? Asked one of the paramedics, a middle-aged man with kind eyes. Sarah Mitchell, she replied through gritted teeth as waves of pain coursed through her body. Well, Sarah, you're going to be okay. We're taking you to Pine Ridge General Hospital. The doctors there will take good care of you. The ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and flashing lights. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the paramedics working around her, checking her vital signs, and starting in 4-line. When they arrived at the hospital, she was quickly wheeled into the emergency department. Pine Ridge General Hospital was a small facility that served the rural mountain community. It had basic emergency services, but was not equipped for major trauma cases. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the attending emergency physician, was the only doctor on duty that night. She quickly examined Sarah, noting the obvious fracture in her left leg and signs of a possible concussion. We need x-rays of that leg immediately, Dr. Walsh instructed the nurse. And let's get a CT scan of her head to rule out any serious brain injury. As Sarah was wheeled to radiology, she caught glimpses of the hospital corridors. The facility was clean but clearly understaffed for a Friday night. She noticed there were only a few nurses on duty, and they all seemed overwhelmed with other patients. The x-rays revealed what Dr. Walsh had suspected, a severe compound fracture of Sarah's left tibia and fibula. The bones were not only broken, but had pierced through the skin, creating an open wound that was at high risk for infection. This type of injury required immediate surgical intervention by an orthopedic specialist. Miss Mitchell, Dr. Walsh explained as she returned to Sarah's bedside. You have a very serious fracture in your left leg. This type of injury needs specialized care that we can't provide here. I'm going to arrange for you to be transferred to Denver General Hospital, where they have orthopedic surgeons who can properly treat your condition." Sarah nodded weakly, too exhausted and in too much pain to fully comprehend the severity of her situation. "When can I be transferred?" she asked. Dr. Walsh hesitated. "That's where we have a problem. The weather has gotten worse, and the mountain roads are becoming dangerous. The ambulance service is hesitant to make the trip to Denver tonight. We might have to wait until morning." "But, doctor," Sarah protested, "the pain is getting worse. Can't you do something here? We'll manage your pain with medication, and I'll clean and dress the wound to prevent infection. But the definitive treatment needs to happen in Denver." Sarah was moved to a small room in the emergency department. The pain medication helped somewhat, but she could still feel a throbbing ache in her leg. As the hours passed, her condition began to deteriorate. The wound in her leg was becoming more swollen and discolored, and she developed a low-grade fever. Dr. Walsh checked on her periodically, but the hospital was dealing with other emergencies that night. A multi-car accident on the interstate had brought in several patients, stretching the small staff to its limits. Sarah found herself waiting longer and longer between visits from medical personnel. By morning, Sarah's fever had spiked, and the area around her wound had become red and inflamed. The signs of infection were becoming more obvious, but the hospital staff was still focused on other, more immediately critical patients. When Dr. Walsh finally examined her again, she was concerned about the development of infection, but still believed that transfer to Denver was the best course of action. "The roads are clearer now," Dr. Walsh informed Sarah. "We should be able to get you transfer this afternoon." But afternoon came and went without a transfer. The orthopedic surgeon in Denver was in emergency surgery with another patient, and there were no available beds in the trauma unit. Sarah's condition continued to worsen as she waited. The infection in her leg was spreading, and she was becoming increasingly weak and disoriented. The nursing staff, overwhelmed with their workload, began to view Sarah as a stable patient who was simply waiting for transfer. They checked on her less frequently, assuming that her pain and discomfort were manageable with medication. What they didn't realize was that Sarah was developing a serious systemic infection that was threatening her life. Sarah tried to advocate for herself, pressing the call button when her symptoms worsened, but her concerns were often dismissed. "The doctor knows about your condition," nurses would tell her. "You just need to be patient until we can get you transferred." As the second day passed, Sarah felt herself growing weaker. The fever was making her delirious at times, and she had difficulty staying awake. The wound in her leg was now clearly infected, with red streaks extending up toward her knee. She was experiencing what medical professionals call sepsis, a life-threatening condition where the body's response to infection begins to damage its own tissues and organs. Despite her deteriorating condition, the hospital staff continued to treat her case as a routine transfer situation. They were focused on more dramatic emergencies, and Sarah's quiet suffering went largely unnoticed. She was the patient who didn't complain loudly, who tried to be understanding about the hospital's limitations, and who trusted that the medical professionals knew what they were doing. On the third day, Sarah's sister Emma arrived at the hospital. Emma lived in California, but had driven straight through when she learned about the accident. What she found when she entered Sarah's room shocked her. Her sister was pale, feverish, and clearly very ill. "Sarah, oh my God, what's happened to you?" Emma asked, taking her sister's hand and finding it burning hot with fever. Sarah looked at her sister with glassy, unfocused eyes. "Emma, when did you get here? I don't feel very good." Emma immediately went to find Dr. Walsh, demanding to know why her sister looked so sick. "She's been here for 3 days, Emma said firmly. "Why hasn't she been transferred yet? And why does she have such a high fever?" Dr. Walsh examined Sarah again and was alarmed by what she found. The infection had indeed progressed to sepsis, and Sarah's blood pressure was dropping dangerously low. Her condition had become critical while everyone assumed she was stable. We need to start aggressive antibiotic treatment immediately, Dr. Walsh ordered. And we need to get her to Denver now, regardless of bed availability. But the damage was already done. 3 days of inadequate treatment had allowed the infection to spread throughout Sarah's system. What should have been a treatable orthopedic injury had become a life-threatening medical emergency due to neglect and poor communication. As the medical team finally sprang into action, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness on her hospital bed. She was vaguely aware of increased activity around her, of urgent conversations between medical personnel, and of her sister's worried voice nearby. But she was too weak to fully understand what was happening. The ambulance finally arrived to transport her to Denver General Hospital, but Sarah was now fighting for her life. The sepsis had compromised her organs, and she was in septic shock. What had started as a car accident with a broken leg had become a battle for survival due to medical negligence. As the ambulance raced through the mountain roads toward Denver, Sarah's life hung in the balance. The paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her vital signs, but her condition was critical. Emma rode alongside, holding her sister's hand and praying that they would reach the hospital in time. Neither Emma nor the medical team knew about Sarah's past, about the skills and training that lay hidden beneath her quiet exterior. They saw only a graphic designer who had been in a car accident, not understanding that they were treating someone who had once been among the most elite warriors in the American military. Sarah had never spoken about her time in the Navy SEALs to anyone in Pine Ridge. It was a chapter of her life she had deliberately closed, too painful to revisit. But as she fought for her life in the back of that ambulance, her military training began to surface unconsciously. Her breathing, even in her unconscious state, showed the control patterns she had learned during survival training. Her body, weakened by infection, still carried the muscle memory of someone who had endured far worse conditions than most people could imagine. The doctors and nurses who had treated her so carelessly at Pine Ridge General had no idea that they had failed one of their country's heroes. They didn't know that the quiet woman they had neglected possessed a strength and resilience that had been forged in some of the most dangerous places on earth. As the ambulance continued its race against time, Sarah's past and present collided in a struggle that would soon reveal truths that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. The woman they had ignored and dismissed was about to show them exactly what they had failed to recognize, and the consequences of their neglect were about to become far more serious than they could have ever imagined. The trauma bay at Denver General Hospital erupted into controlled chaos as Sarah's ambulance arrived. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the chief of emergency medicine, immediately took charge of her case. One look at her condition told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the situation. "This patient is in septic shock," he announced to his team. "How long has she been like this?" The paramedic who had transported her shook his head grimly. "She's been at Pine Ridge General for 3 days with an open fracture. Looks like they let an infection run wild." Dr. Rodriguez felt a surge of anger, but pushed it aside to focus on saving Sarah's life. "Let's get blood cultures, start broad-spectrum antibiotics, and get her to the or immediately. We need to debride that wound and stabilize the fracture before the sepsis kills her." As the medical team worked frantically around Sarah's unconscious form, Emma stood helplessly in the corner, watching her sister fight for her life. A social worker approached her to gather information for the hospital records. "I need to get some background information about your sister," the social worker said gently. "What's her full name and date of birth?" "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, born March 15th, 1995, Emma replied, not taking her eyes off her sister. "Does she have any medical conditions we should know about? Any allergies to medications?" Emma shook her head. "No allergies that I know of. She's always been really healthy. She exercises regularly, doesn't smoke or drink much. She's actually in better shape than most people I know." "What about her occupation? Any workplace hazards or exposures?" "She's a graphic designer. Works from home mostly, very quiet job. She moved to Colorado a few years ago to get away from Emma paused, realizing she didn't really know the full story of why Sarah had left her previous life. She needed a fresh start after leaving her last job. The social worker made notes, but didn't press for more details. However, when she ran Sarah's name through the hospital's computer system to check for previous records, something unusual appeared on the screen. There was a flag in the system indicating that Sarah had military medical records, but accessing them required special clearance. "Ma'am," the social worker said to Emma, "our system is showing that your sister has some military medical history. Do you know anything about that?" Emma looked confused. "Military?" "No, Sarah's never been in the military. She went to college for graphic design and has been working in that field ever since. There must be some mistake." But the social worker had seen these flags before. She quietly made a note to have someone follow up on the military records. Sometimes patients had reasons for not sharing their military background, and it was important to respect their privacy while ensuring they received appropriate care. Meanwhile, in the operating room, Dr. Rodriguez and the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Patricia Chun, worked to save Sarah's leg and her life. The infection had spread extensively through the bone and surrounding tissue. They had to remove a significant amount of dead tissue and insert external fixation hardware to stabilize the fracture. "This is a mess," Dr. Chun muttered as she worked. "This infection should never have been allowed to progress this far." The initial care was completely inadequate. "Have you seen the patient's chart from Pine Ridge?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. I glanced at it. Minimal documentation, delayed treatment, and apparently no one recognized the signs of developing sepsis. This woman nearly died because of their negligence. As they continued the surgery, Sarah's vital signs gradually improved with the aggressive antibiotic treatment and surgical intervention. But she remained unconscious, her body fighting the massive infection that had overwhelmed her system. After the surgery, Sarah was moved to the intensive care unit, where she remained on a ventilator to support her breathing while her body recovered. Emma maintained a constant vigil at her bedside, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair and refusing to leave despite the nurse's suggestions that she go home to rest. On the second day in the ICU, a man in a Navy uniform appeared at the nurse's station. Lieutenant Commander James Harper had driven from a Navy base in Colorado Springs after being notified through military channels that one of his former team members was critically injured. "I'm here to see Sarah Mitchell," he told the nurse. "I'm her former commanding officer." The nurse looked at the military records that had finally been accessed. "Are you Lieutenant Commander Harper? You're listed as her emergency contact in her military file." "That's correct." "How is she?" "She's stable, but still critical. She's been unconscious since she arrived." "Are you family?" "No, but she doesn't have any other family except her sister, and Sarah specifically listed me as her military emergency contact. She's one of my former sailors." The nurse nodded and led him to Sarah's room. When Emma saw the uniformed officer, she stood up in confusion. "Excuse me, who are you?" she asked. Lieutenant Commander Harper extended his hand. "James Harper, United States Navy. I was Sarah's commanding officer. I came as soon as I heard about her condition." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "I'm sorry, but there's been some mistake. Sarah's never been in the Navy. She's a graphic designer." Harper looked at Emma with surprise, then at the unconscious woman in the hospital bed. "Ma'am, your sister served with distinction in the United States Navy for 8 years. She was a member of SEAL Team 3. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She sank back in her chair, staring at her sister's peaceful face. "That's impossible. Sarah never mentioned anything about the military, let alone being a SEAL. Women can't even be SEALs." "Actually, ma'am, that changed several years ago. Your sister was part of the first class of women to successfully complete SEAL training. She was an exceptional operator." Harper pulled out his phone and showed Emma a photo of Sarah in military gear, standing with her SEAL team in what looked like a desert environment. This was taken in Afghanistan during her last deployment. Emma's world tilted on its axis as she looked at the photo. The woman in the picture was unmistakably her sister, but she looked completely different. Gone was the quiet, reserved graphic designer Emma knew. In the photo, Sarah stood with confidence and strength, wearing combat gear and carrying weapons with obvious familiarity. "I don't understand," Emma whispered. "Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she tell anyone?" Harper's expression softened with understanding. Sarah left the Navy after a very difficult mission. She lost some good friends and was dealing with what we now recognize as PTSD. She wanted to start over, to find peace away from that life. A lot of veterans do that after traumatic experiences. As if hearing her name, Sarah stirred slightly in her bed. Her eyes fluttered open for the first time in days, unfocused and confused. Harper immediately stepped closer to her bedside. "Sarah, it's James. You're in the hospital, but you're safe." Sarah's eyes slowly focused on his face. When she recognized him, tears began to flow down her cheeks. "James," she whispered hoarsely around the ventilator tube. "Yeah, it's me. You gave us quite a scare." He looked at the medical equipment surrounding her. "What happened?" Sarah tried to speak, but couldn't around the tube. Harper turned to Emma. "She's trying to communicate. Have a doctor said when they can remove the breathing tube?" A doctor entered the room at that moment, Dr. Rodriguez making his evening rounds. He was surprised to see the uniformed officer, but focused on his patient. "Sarah, you're awake. That's excellent. Your oxygen levels have improved significantly. I think we can remove the ventilator." After the breathing tube was removed, Sarah's first clear words were directed at Harper. "How did you know I was here?" "Your military medical records flagged when you were admitted. The Navy was notified automatically." He glanced at Emma. "Your sister didn't know about your service." Sarah looked at Emma with pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I wanted to tell you, but why didn't you?" Emma asked, moving closer to the bed. "All these years, I thought you were just a graphic designer living quietly in the mountains." "You're a Navy SEAL?" Sarah corrected quietly. "I left that life behind." Dr. Rodriguez had been listening to the conversation with growing interest. "Ms. Mitchell, your military training might actually explain something we've been puzzled about. Your recovery has been remarkable for someone who was as sick as you were. Your conditioning and mental toughness probably helped save your life." Sarah managed a weak smile. "SEER training teaches you to survive worse than a hospital infection." "What's SEER training?" Emma asked. Harper answered for Sarah, who was still too weak to talk much. "Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. It's an intensive program that teaches military personnel how to survive in hostile environments. Your sister endured things that would break most people." Over the next few hours, as Sarah's strength gradually returned, pieces of her story began to emerge. She had joined the Navy right after college, driven by a desire to serve her country and challenge herself in ways that few people ever could. She had been among the first women selected for SEAL training when the program opened to female candidates. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Sarah told Emma as they sat together later that evening. Harper had left to handle the military paperwork, but promised to return the next day. "The training was designed to break you down and build you back up. Many of the male candidates didn't make it through. But you did," Emma said with a mixture of pride and amazement. "I did. And for 6 years, I served with some of the best people I've ever known. We did missions that I can't talk about in places I can't name. We saved lives and protected people who will never know our names." Emma reached for her sister's hand. "What happened? Why did you leave?" Sarah's expression darkened, and she was quiet for a long moment. "My last mission went wrong. We lost 2 team members, good friends of mine. I was the team medic, and I couldn't save them." Her voice broke slightly. "I blamed myself for a long time. Even though the investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, I couldn't get past it. Is that why you moved to Colorado?" "I needed to find peace. The mountains reminded me of some of the places we'd been deployed, but in a good way. I thought if I could just live quietly and help people through my design work, maybe I could find some purpose again." Emma squeezed her sister's hand. "You did find purpose. You've helped a lot of local businesses with their marketing. You volunteer at the animal shelter. You make a difference." "It never felt like enough," Sarah admitted. "Not after the work we used to do." The next morning, Harper returned with several other people in uniform. Word had spread through Sarah's former unit that one of their own had been seriously injured, and her teammates wanted to show their support. The ICU nurses were initially resistant to allowing so many visitors, but when they learned about Sarah's service record, they made an exception. Master Chief Williams, who had been Sarah's mentor during her early years in the SEALs, was among the visitors. "Good to see you awake, Mitchell," he said gruffly, though his relief was obvious. "Master Chief," Sarah replied with a weak smile, "I didn't expect to see you here. When one of ours is down, we all show up. That's what teams do." The other team members shared stories of missions they'd completed together, carefully avoiding classified details, but painting a picture of Sarah's courage and competence that left Emma in awe. She was learning that her quiet sister had a completely different identity that she had successfully hidden for years. "Sarah was our medic," explained Petty Officer Martinez. "She saved more lives than any of us can count. When we were pinned down by enemy fire, she would crawl out under fire to treat wounded civilians or teammates. She never hesitated. She also had some of the best tactical instincts in the unit," added Lieutenant Johnson. "She could read a situation and anticipate problems before they developed. It's why we all trusted her completely." As Sarah listened to her former teammates, Emma could see a change in her sister's demeanor. The quiet, reserved woman she knew was replaced by someone who carried herself differently, who spoke with more authority and confidence. It was as if being around her military family was awakening parts of her personality that had been dormant. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring Sarah's progress, was amazed by her recovery. "I have to say, your improvement has been remarkable. Most patients with sepsis as severe as yours would still be on life support. SEALs are taught that the mind can overcome physical limitations," Sarah explained. "When your body wants to quit, your training takes over. Well, your training may have saved your life. But I have to ask you about the treatment you received at Pine Ridge General." Dr. Rodriguez's expression became serious. "The care you received was substandard, and I'm required to report it to the state medical board." Sarah's jaw tightened. "They basically ignored me for 3 days. I kept trying to tell them something was wrong, but they dismissed my concerns." "That's inexcusable," Harper said angrily. "You're one of the toughest people I know. If you said something was wrong, they should have listened." Emma had been quiet during much of the conversation, but now she spoke up. "I want to understand something. At Pine Ridge, they treated Sarah like she was just another patient, someone who didn't matter much. But you're all talking about her like she's some kind of hero." Master Chief Williams looked at Emma seriously. "Ma'am, your sister is a hero. She's got medals that prove it. But more than that, she's the kind of person who runs toward danger when others run away from it. The people at that hospital had no idea who they were dealing with." "What do you mean, medals?" Emma asked. Sarah looked uncomfortable. It's not important." "Like hell it's not important," Harper said. "Sarah has a Bronze Star with Combat Distinguisher for Valor, a Purple Heart from when she was wounded in action, and a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for saving the lives of Afghan civilians during a terrorist attack." Emma stared at her sister in shock. "You never told me any of this." "I didn't want to be defined by my military service," Sarah said quietly. "I wanted to be just a regular person living a regular life." "But that's not who you are," Emma replied. "You're extraordinary, and you've been hiding it." As the day continued, more details of Sarah's military service emerged. Her teammates shared stories of her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to her fellow service members. They painted a picture of a woman who had sacrificed her own safety repeatedly to protect others, who had earned the respect and admiration of some of the toughest warriors in the world. The contrast between how she had been treated at Pine Ridge General and the respect she commanded from her military peers was stark and troubling. At Pine Ridge, she had been seen as an inconvenient patient whose concerns could be dismissed. To her SEAL teammates, she was a hero whose word carried absolute weight. As evening approached and visiting hours ended, Sarah's military family prepared to leave. But Harper pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Sarah, I need to ask you something," he said seriously. Are you planning to pursue legal action against the hospital in Pine Ridge? Sarah considered the question. I don't know. I survived, and that's what matters. It's not just about you, Harper replied. It's about every other patient who might be treated the same way. You have the platform and the credibility to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. Sarah nodded slowly. You're right. I'll think about it. Good. And, Sarah, it's time to stop hiding who you are. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. After Harper left, Sarah and Emma sat together in the quiet of the ICU room. The monitors beeped steadily, showing Sarah's improving vital signs. I have so many questions, Emma said finally. I know, and I'll answer them all eventually. But, seeing everyone today made me realize something. I've been running from my past instead of integrating it into my present. I thought I could just be someone else, but that's not really possible. What are you going to do now? Sarah looked out the window at the city lights of Denver. I'm going to get better, and then I'm going to go back to Pine Ridge. But I'm not going back as the same person who left. They need to know who they failed to help, and they need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Emma squeezed her sister's hand. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you. Thank you. And Em, I'm sorry I kept this from you for so long. You deserve to know who your sister really was. I'm just glad I know now, Emma replied. And I'm proud of you. I always was, but now I understand why. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The strength that came from being surrounded by people who truly understood her. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like herself again. And tomorrow, she would begin the process of reclaiming her identity and ensuring that no one else would suffer from the kind of negligent care she had received. The quiet graphic designer from Pine Ridge was gone. In her place was a decorated Navy SEAL who was about to remind a small mountain hospital exactly what it meant to fail one of America's finest warriors. 3 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell walked through the front doors of Pine Ridge General Hospital. Her left leg was still supported by crutches, and she moved more slowly than before the accident, but there was something fundamentally different about her presence. Gone was the quiet uncertainty of the woman who had been ignored and dismissed. In her place stood someone who carried herself with unmistakable authority and purpose. She was accompanied by her attorney, Marcus Chun, a former military lawyer who specialized in medical malpractice cases. Following behind them was Lieutenant Commander Harper, who had taken leave to support Sarah through this process. The small group drew curious looks from the hospital staff as they made their way to the administration office. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had been Sarah's attending physician during those critical first days, happened to be passing through the lobby when she saw the group. She recognized Sarah immediately and felt an uncomfortable twist in her stomach. She had heard through the medical community that Sarah had nearly died from sepsis at Denver General, and she knew that Pine Ridge's treatment of her case was being scrutinized. Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Walsh approached cautiously. I heard you were recovering. I'm glad to see you doing better. Sarah turned to face the doctor, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. Dr. Walsh, yes, I'm recovering, no thanks to the care I received here. I want you to know that we did everything we could within our capabilities, Dr. Walsh said defensively. We're a small hospital with limited resources. Dr. Walsh, Attorney Chun interjected, my client nearly died from sepsis that developed under your care. Limited resources don't excuse gross negligence. Dr. Walsh looked uncomfortable. If you'll excuse me, I have patients to see. She hurried away, but not before Sarah caught the dismissive tone that was all too familiar. The group proceeded to the administrative office, where they had a scheduled meeting with the hospital administrator, Robert Morrison. Morrison was a businessman who had been brought in to run the hospital, but had little medical background. He was clearly nervous about the meeting, having spent the past 3 weeks consulting with lawyers and insurance companies. Ms. Mitchell, Morrison said as they entered his office, please have a seat. I want you to know that we take all patient concerns very seriously. Mr. Morrison, Sarah replied, settling into her chair and placing her crutches beside her. I'm not here just as a concerned patient. I'm here as someone who was failed by your institution in ways that nearly cost me my life. Morrison nodded nervously. I understand you had complications during your stay here. Complications? Harper spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of command. Sir, your staff allowed a decorated Navy SEAL to develop life-threatening sepsis because they couldn't be bothered to properly monitor her condition. Morrison's eyes widened. Navy SEAL. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Mr. Morrison, during the 3 days I was a patient here, your staff treated me like an inconvenience. When I tried to tell them my symptoms were worsening, I was dismissed. When I explained that something felt wrong, I was told to be patient. Your medical professionals ignored clear signs of infection because I didn't fit their idea of an important patient. I'm sure our staff provided appropriate care according to our protocols, Morrison replied, though he sounded less certain than before. Attorney Chun placed a thick folder on Morrison's desk. These are the medical records from Denver General, along with expert opinions from 3 infectious disease specialists and 2 emergency medicine doctors. They all agree that Ms. Mitchell's infection was allowed to progress far beyond what should have been acceptable in any medical facility. Sarah opened her own folder and pulled out several photographs. These are photos of my leg when I arrived at Denver General. The infection had progressed so far that they had to remove significant amounts of dead tissue. I almost lost my leg, and I almost lost my life. Morrison looked at the photos and visibly paled. The images showed the extent of the infection and the damage that had been done during those 3 critical days at his hospital. Moreover, Sarah continued, your staff never bothered to check my military medical records. If they had, they would have discovered that I have extensive medical training myself. I know what infection looks like, I know what sepsis feels like, and I would try to communicate that to your staff. Harper added, Ms. Mitchell served as a combat medic in addition to her other duties. She's treated more trauma cases than most of your emergency staff will see in their entire careers. When someone with her training tells you something is wrong, you listen. Morrison was beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation. Ms. Mitchell, I had no idea about your military background. That's exactly the problem, Sarah replied firmly. Your staff made assumptions about who I was and what I was worth based on how I looked and how quietly I expressed my concerns. You didn't see a decorated veteran. You saw an expendable patient. Attorney Chin leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, we have documented evidence of negligent care, delayed treatment, and failure to recognize and respond to clear signs of infection. This case has the potential for significant legal consequences. What were you looking for? Morrison asked hesitantly. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Mr. Morrison, I could sue this hospital for everything it's worth. I could have pursued criminal charges against specific staff members. I could have contacted the media and turned this into a national story about how a small hospital in Colorado nearly killed a decorated veteran through negligence. Morrison waited, clearly expecting the other shoe to drop. But that's not what I want, Sarah continued. What I want is to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I want systemic changes that will protect future patients. What kind of changes? Morrison asked. Attorney Chun pulled out another document. First, mandatory training for all medical staff on recognizing signs of sepsis and infection. Second, implementation of a patient advocate program where patients' concerns are given proper weight. Third, establishment of protocols for consulting with larger medical facilities when cases exceed your capabilities. Sarah added, I also want regular audits of patient care, particularly for cases that require transfer to other facilities. And I want transparency in your mortality and complication rates. Morrison looked at the list, clearly calculating the costs involved. These changes would be expensive to implement. Not as expensive as the lawsuit I could file, Sarah replied calmly. And certainly not as expensive as another patient dying from preventable complications. Harper stood up and walked to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot. Sir, Ms. Mitchell served multiple combat deployments where she risked her life to protect people she'd never met. She came home and chose to live quietly in your community contributing as a productive citizen. When she needed help, your institution failed her catastrophically. She's offering you a chance to do better. Morrison was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the documents. If we agree to implement these changes, would you be willing to forego legal action? Sarah exchanged glances with her attorney. That depends on your commitment to actually following through. I'm not interested in empty promises. We would need a formal agreement, Attorney Chin added, with specific timelines and accountability measures. And Ms. Mitchell would need to see evidence that the changes are being implemented effectively. Morrison nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with our board of directors, but I think we can work something out. After the meeting, Sarah and her companions walked out of the hospital into the bright mountain sunshine. Harper turned to her as they reached their cars. How do you feel? He asked. Sarah took a deep breath of the crisp Colorado air. Like myself again, for the first time in years. What do you mean? I spent 3 years trying to be someone I'm not, she explained. I thought I could just be a quiet civilian and forget about my training, my experiences, my identity as a SEAL. But this experience taught me that I can't separate myself from who I am. Emma, who had driven up from California to be present for the meeting, joined the conversation. So what happens now? Sarah looked back at the hospital, then at the mountains that had been her refuge for the past 3 years. Now I figure out how to integrate all parts of who I am. I'm not going to hide my military service anymore, but I'm also not going to abandon the life I've built here. Have you thought about what that looks like practically? Harper asked. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile her sister had seen from her in weeks. Actually, I have. I'm going to expand my design business, but I'm also going to start offering consulting services to rural hospitals on emergency protocols and patient advocacy. I want to use my medical training to help improve care in small facilities like this one. That's perfect, Emma said with enthusiasm. You'll be helping people and using all your skills. And I'm going to start volunteering with veteran services, Sarah continued. There are a lot of former service members in Colorado who are struggling with the transition to civilian life. I think I understand their challenges better now. Harper nodded approvingly. The Sarah Mitchell I served with was always thinking about how to help others. It's good to see that part of you coming back. Over the following weeks, word of Sarah's military service spread through Pine Ridge. The reaction was mixed, but generally positive. Some community members expressed amazement that a decorated Navy SEAL had been living quietly among them. Others were embarrassed that their local hospital had treated such a distinguished veteran so poorly. Sarah found that being open about her background was liberating in unexpected ways. She no longer had to carefully avoid certain topics of conversation or worry about accidentally revealing details about her past. She could talk openly about her experiences, her training, and her perspective on service and sacrifice. The changes at Pine Ridge General Hospital were implemented more quickly than anyone had expected. Morrison, fearing the publicity that could result from a lawsuit against a Navy SEAL veteran, prioritized the reforms. The hospital brought in consultants to train staff on sepsis recognition, established a patient advocate position, and created protocols for better communication with major medical centers. Dr. Walsh, who had initially been defensive about Sarah's case, eventually approached her privately to apologize. I want you to know that your case has changed how I practice medicine, she told Sarah during a chance meeting at the local grocery store. I realized that I made assumptions about you that affected the care you received, and I'm working to do better. Sarah appreciated the apology and recognized the courage it took for Dr. Walsh to admit her mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from this and make sure other patients get better care, she replied. 6 months after the accident, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Regional Medical Conference in Denver. She had been invited to speak about her experience and the importance of patient advocacy. Looking out at the audience of doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators, she felt the familiar focus that came with an important mission. Medical professionals often talk about patient care as if patients are passive recipients of treatment, she began. But patients are active participants in their own health care, and they often know their bodies better than anyone else. When a patient tells you something is wrong, you need to listen. She clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of herself in military uniform. You might look at me and see a young woman, a graphic designer, someone who doesn't understand medical complexity. But you wouldn't see my 8 years of military service, my training as a combat medic, or my experience treating trauma in hostile environments. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. The staff at Pine Ridge General made assumptions about who I was and what I was worth based on my appearance and my quiet demeanor. They didn't see a decorated veteran. They saw an inconvenient patient whose concerns could be dismissed. That almost cost me my life. Sarah went on to describe the specific failures in her care and the systemic changes that had been implemented at Pine Ridge. She talked about the importance of seeing each patient as a complete human being with their own knowledge, experience, and insights about their condition. Every patient deserves to be heard, regardless of their background, she concluded. Whether they're veteran or a civilian, educated or not, wealthy or poor, every person who comes to you for help deserves your full attention and respect. You never know who you're really treating until you take the time to truly see them. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Afterward, dozens of medical professionals approached Sarah to discuss implementing similar reforms at their own facilities. The ripple effects of her experience at Pine Ridge were spreading throughout the healthcare system. Later that evening, Sarah and Emma sat on the deck of Sarah's mountain cabin, looking out at the sunset over the peaks. Emma had extended her stay in Colorado, and the sisters were rebuilding their relationship based on honesty and understanding. "Do you regret keeping your military service secret for so long?" Emma asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I regret that it nearly got me killed, but I don't regret taking time to heal and figure out who I wanted to be. Sometimes you need to step away from one identity to discover another. And now I'm all of those things. I'm a veteran, a graphic designer, a medic, an advocate, a sister, a community member. I don't have to choose just one identity." Emma raised her glass of wine in a toast. "To my sister, the Navy SEAL who I'm just getting to know." Sarah clinked glasses with her sister. "To family and to second chances." As the stars began to appear over the mountains, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before her last deployment. She had faced down the negligence that nearly killed her, used her voice to create positive change, and reclaimed all aspects of her identity. The quiet graphic designer and the decorated Navy SEAL were the same person, and she no longer needed to choose between them. The small-town hospital that had dismissed her concerns and ignored her suffering had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of treating every patient with dignity and respect. And Sarah had learned that hiding from her past wasn't the path to healing. Integrating all parts of herself was. In the end, the accident that had nearly taken her life had given her something even more valuable: the courage to be completely herself and the platform to help others receive the care and respect they deserved. The woman they had ignored and dismissed had become a force for change, ensuring that no other patient would suffer the same neglect. Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL veteran, graphic designer, patient advocate, and survivor, had found her way home to herself. And in doing so, she had made her community and the broader medical system a better place for everyone.